Carroll Valley. I don't know, most of you probably know as you leave Thames, you head up the past the racecourse that's nicely kept and things, and then you get the racecourse hill. But at the moment,
can you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Adrian Davis. I live up the Carroll Valley on Tiana Lane, and obviously up and down that area regularly. So it's an area that sort of hits you every time you go into the valley as you head up past the hill. It's at the moment they've been liberally applying weed killer, and it's a nice brown colour. I think you've got copies of the photographs that I took there, and there's one piece of planting just beyond there that's beautifully done. I'm not quite sure who does it. People probably know.
I did.
You did?
I'm not all of that, I did love it.
Yes, but there's people along there maintaining it. Yeah, oh, okay. They do a fantastic job.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yes, basically, I want that to be continued on. I fully understand the access to the racecourse car park and metal dump and things, but the metal dump in high school is the politest description of how they're good. Probably weeds about a metre high in some places, and I just propose we have some native plantings along there, less use of weed killer on the side, and also continuing down the hill where there's actually rocks that doesn't show in the photo, but there's a sort of rock embankment there that is particularly uninspiring. So really asking for that to be looked at. So what I'm asking for is for support the concept of supplying plants, maybe labour, to establish the area with volunteer help and ongoing volunteer support for maintenance. And in addition, reduce the weed killer in this area, as I think this would actually give a nice visual impact to the approach to the valley. It's, I believe, within council control, unlike some of the other areas, like further along, there's a large amount of machinery and things. I don't think that's within any easy control. So that's my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few points of clarification or questions from the community board. Adrian, are there any questions? No? Everyone's okay?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Nancy, please welcome forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Stan. Clancy Nixon. I live in Towery Road, and I represent a group of residents who 3 or 4 years ago approached council about a reduction in the speed limit there from 70 to 50 k's. We prepared a petition which went to transit, and the result of that was an independent review carried out by Grey Matter, which some of you will have seen and some of you won't have seen. We have it as an overhead, I believe.
It's been tabled.
It's been tabled?
Yeah.
You don't want to put it on as an overhead? No? Okay, that's fine. Been very simple to have spoken to it as an overhead, but never mind. We want the speed, the recommendation was that the speed limit be reduced in part of the area by the gold mine experience, by the St John's depot to 50 k's, and the balance be reduced to 60. The residents maintain that it should be totally reduced to 50 for the full length. The argument seems to be that it is not fully a residential area, and that one side of the road is the foreshore, and we would maintain that is just as big a distraction as other things, with oyster catchers and people parking and sunsets and all the rest of it. So we don't think that it's fair to say that it's one side residential only and there is nothing to distract on the other side of the road. So we hope that that can be considered. The Transit have introduced a method of calculating classifications of roads, and you'll be familiar with, or I hope you are familiar with the expression ONRC, And this classifies roads as national arterial, regional primary collector and secondary collector. This is a primary collector road. One of the things in Transit's correspondence is that it will also reflect that transit corridors are not just for travelling through. These are places where people stop, socialise, enjoy and do business. So what we're saying is this is not just a stretch of country road, do what you like in it. And in recent times, if you look at the amount of money that's been spent on cycleways and trying to, if you go to Auckland and you look on the left-hand side of the road, at Manuherica, you've got incredible investments in getting cyclists to use these areas. So it is no longer acceptable to say that that's just for transport. It's a main road, arterial road. It is a place for people to stop, socialise, enjoy and do business. So I think we need to make that point. The recommendation is that part of the road be reduced to 50. The whole thing is only 1.8 kilometres long. Yeah. They've suggested that they reduce 500 metres of 1.8 to 50 and the balance to 60. We think that would be confusing to drivers. Transit are concerned that if they have changes in the speed limit, it will confuse drivers. When you're coming from the north end of Tauru at 50 kilometres, you run into 70 and then you run back to 50. The police have always expressed concern about how roads change from one speed limit to the other. And last year there were 2 roads that were changed to 110 kilometres. The police objected to this because as you leave 110, you've got to get down to whatever the new speed limit is. We've got a local example of this, which is just past Aeroview, so if we're coming north into the city, we used to come into a 50k area on the bridge. What happened was everybody hit Toyota factory and they were still doing 70. So what they did was they moved the 50 back up the road so that people had time to slow from 70 down to 50 by the time they entered the 50k area. By having a variety of speeds in there, you've got people that leave at 70 and they're still doing 70 past the yacht club and into that area. So a lot of locals there feel that a reduction to 50 would be beneficial. One of the arguments that was put in this room by the consultant was that there was an economic disadvantage in reducing the speed. That economic disadvantage is 6 seconds from here to Coromandel. So we're a little bit puzzled at the cost of 6 seconds of economic disadvantage. And we think that should be considered as irrelevant to the argument. The St John's base, it's classified here as St John's Education Centre. It isn't just the education centre, it's the base. So when St John's want ambulances out of there in a hurry, they're entering into a 70k area. St John's would like it reduced. Your previous community board endorsed our petition and signed our petition, which we were grateful for. Most drivers seem to think that there's a 10k limit or a 10k clemency period over a speed limit. So if the speed limit's 100, you can go to 110. But at Christmas, you'll see that the police reduced that down to 104. And there's been recent items in the press about police not even wanting to allow the 4. So people that drive in 70k areas often think that they're allowed to drive at 80k's. So you have this sort of cheating by the fact that we never used to get tickets if we went a bit faster than usual. And so we really think that 70 represents 80 to a lot of drivers. And living there, and I get to see a good stretch of road, you have people overtaking, drivers doing 70, you have other drivers overtaking them. And it is particularly dangerous where the store is on a Sunday with people buying ice cream. You've got kids, you've got people running across there, you've got a 70k area, and that needs some attention. I draw your attention to some pictures that are in your handout. Now, you could accuse me of being selective because I've got pictures that are in there too. Graham Hammer's pictures show no traffic. My pictures show traffic. I'm not sure how, if both of us are trying to validate our arguments by saying, hey, look, there's no traffic, put that in the report. Well, if you go a little bit into that report, you'll see there is lots of traffic there. 50 k's brings it into line with the other coastal communities. And we can't understand why you would be going up the coast and then you would hit a community just like ours. The speed limit reduces to 50, but ours is 70. And we have more traffic, not less traffic. So we feel that there's an argument there.
Fancy just time-wise, we're just...
Time-wise, I told Margie that Stratton would put me on the button and come
I mean, we're very sympathetic with this.
All right. Hey, listen, I've wind it up then. I appreciate that from coming today and speaking to your roading people, that you have some attention on this now. The point that I would like to make is that you've got a report which suggests reductions of speed. We would like to see it all 50.
Yep.
Yeah.
The political will used to not be there. The political will, and I've got correspondence from associate ministers of transit and the minister supporting this idea. So we hope, and I'm now aware as of this morning, that you've got papers and you may well be looking at this subject next week. What I want to tell you is I am pestered by all the locals that I got to sign a petition. What have you done, Clancy? Where is it up to?
Yeah, where's it gone?
So I've come here to say to you, well, where is it up to? And I've got that information, thank you. And I appreciate the time to be able to speak to you.
There could be some points of clarification at the bill which we'll ask you because it is high on our agenda to actually.
And it's high on the agenda of the people of Tararoo.
So have you had feedback in relationship to just where this report settled itself? You know, like it was obviously submitted.
Yes, I would hope that you're all familiar.
Yeah.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
That you would have all seen it or something.
Yeah, it was a very comprehensive report.
The work is done.
Yeah.
The research is there. Sorry?
Who commissioned that originally?
Transit commissioned it as a result of our petition and my discussions with the minister.
Oh, good.
I think from my point of view, we're meant to be able to clarify, it's about finding the tool to make it happen, you know, like, which, yeah. That's where I'm at as an individual. To me, it makes no sense at all to decrease some and, you know, etc. It's just, so it sounds easy, but it isn't.
Well, you see, I think it is easy.
Yes,
It's just about gazetting a different speed limit along there and doing it. The research is there, all the planning is there, and the cost is negligible.
and I think that's what our roading people will be telling us about, yeah.
Yeah, and like what you're saying makes sense as far as that, like on the south end of Thames, you have the 70, gets down to 50, over the bridge, you're in town, you're in the 50. To me, it's this other end is a complete anomaly because it's 50, 70, 50, 100, and I think it's way more confusing. And the idea that people would be confused if we changed that to 50, just like we can handle it, you know.
Well, I don't think it would confuse you with 50. It confuses you that it's changing from 50 to 70 to 50.
Exactly, yeah.
And there's very few bits on that bit of road, and I know I'm just asking questions, but very few bits on that road that you can actually safely do 70, to be honest.
Straight on preaching to the converted.
You are.
Wonderful.
No, we really, I mean, you're coming in something from is very timely in relation to what we're doing, and it's a very well. Althea, would you like to come forward? How are you, Althea?
Thank you.
All right.
My chair and councillors, thank you for letting me speak. I'm here today on behalf of the historic cemeteries. We can't say we're a volunteer group because we're not. So there's just several volunteers, known and unknown, that try and maintain the cemeteries as best as we can. There's ongoing problems at Tararoo, resulting, supposedly there are geophys reports are still coming in as to safety, because those that know the big steps were constructed, they continually slip. The rain washes the dirt down, it's a very simple process, but people are still trying to get up there, so that's a concern, even though there's a fence there. So the Thames Heritage Network just wondered how long this is sort of going to go on before something happens, so that's for consideration. We still consider parts of Totra to be historic, because out on the point, they are the oldest graves, and we have got, I'm speaking on behalf of Paula Carr's given me permission to speak as well. They've cleared quite a lot of sections, council and contractors. There were a big tizard plot which was completely overgrown with trees. So we've made a lot of progress out there, but then when a storm comes, the lovely trees dump all the leaves back on the graves. The main concerns are at Shortland, seeing that's our biggest place we can access. So I'll speak a little bit about Shortland Cemetery, and some documents were sent.
Yes.
Graham Pearce, who we obviously can't do without, has done amazing clearing work, and I hoped he would come today, but that's not Graham.
That's been amazing.
And we discovered a whole line at the top extension, the first bit when you look up from Danby Street, just over the hill bit. There was a whole line of graves people had asked me to take photographs of. They were completely covered, so that's the first lot of photos. So Graham has spent considerable time, and now you'll see the difference in that bottom photo. So those are actually within the cemetery boundaries. So we've got an agreement from Paula now and the contractors that they should stay mown and cleared, because there's no point us having to redo all the time parts that are actually within the cemetery. And already like relatives have been so pleased. On the next page is another example of completely overgrown area, and this, I mean, these are within cemetery boundaries. So that's all we're really asking. Once we clear things, that they then become taken over by the contractors. The next big thing, we did have a working bee on the 31st. And wonderful Facebook and everything else, yes, we'll come. We were expecting hundreds to turn up, but sadly there were just 7 of us. But we still managed to clear about 20 plots, and the pictures at the bottom show Graham and his cousin just working away, and then some of the work where it's actually been cleared off. One of the plans, Paula and I very quickly realised that our dream of having a lovely weed-free cemetery was just beyond it. So we're scaling back things, and they might trial a use of an acceptable chemical. I mean, I hate sprays, but there are some that are used at Omahu that are more organic. So our plan, the big plan I want to tell you about today, is to sort of put places like Shortland Cemetery on the map. They're already a historic tourist destination, and I keep saying to you, I don't know whether you realise how many people actually go and visit it. And there's always someone up there. So the idea is that it'll become a walking track, and that there'll be, Graham is in the process of marking a track going right up the top and around that is considered safe. So we'll need things like signage, which I think is going to be able to be funded. And then the next big thing is to highlight specific graves, and those are the graves that we will try at this stage to keep tidy. And with things like, and I've got a booklet here, what's the booklet here that I once did, showing some of the characters within the cemetery. Now our idea is similar to what you see along the biking track, some sort of plaque that's maybe suspended on just 2 wooden frames, or there may be some put onto a grave, and it'll have like a picture of the person, what they did within the town. So we actually will create like an open-air museum that will actually tell the history of the town through our old residents that are buried there. So we've got some very famous people, some infamous people, and all sorts. So we hope in that way too, you may get more volunteers that come up and say, look, we'd like to keep this a little bit tidier. The intention, we said, we will keep certain graves clean, and also our war veterans, and those are the ones. There's over 50 World War I veterans up there, and they just get completely overlooked compared to the ones at the Tocha Cemetery. And there are at least 5 that are completely being broken, so I'm trying to approach Veteran Affairs to see whether we can get those replaced, the plaques.
How are you, Althea? Yeah.
No?
It's all good.
All right. Our problem is ongoing funding.
Yeah.
Because we're only volunteers, we can't apply for something.
Yeah.
So we dread the thought of having to form yet another historic group in Thames. So we're exploring that, and one idea has been the Heritage Network have said whether we could apply under their umbrella.
Yeah.
Rather than actually have to form another group. So, because there is money available, not just obviously from your community grants, but from, yes, other groups around New Zealand, whether you LOFO and all sorts of things, but we have to be a recognised group.
Is there any talk that it should be included in the Parks and Reserve maintenance plan?
We're always talking, but we've been told there's only so much sort of money. But we hope by making it the track more a park, that, you know, we could sort of double dip almost, but it's a cemetery plus it's a park, which it is. People walk there every day.
It's such an important aspect, and when you actually, highlight some of the significance of the history
Yes.
that relates to, I can tell you of 1 or 2 as well.
Yes.
Attached to Lord Byron, for example.
Yes.
Absolutely
There's some
amazing.
famous people up there, and so just ordinary people. I would put it, and this is something we thought once we did get this plaque idea formulated, that relatives may see it as a cheaper way. I mean, you can't afford to put headstone. I've got 5 great-grandparents up there without a headstone. I can't afford it, but I could afford to put some sort of plaque.
Yeah.
Saying, great-grandma Timmins was a goat herder at Kuranui Bay, an alcoholic and a goat herder. Thank you.
Sounds fantastic. I'd like to immediately.
Are there any other points of clarification?
So presumably that's just the bit, and I've taken Sally's for a walk a few times. Presumably that's just the bit, sort of from the water tank down.
Down, yes. So that's the extension. From the water tower down is the extension, and we've been clearing the eastern side of the extension. So that's down in the dip below the water tower.
Right.
But by clearing it, he's actually opened up, and you can actually see now into the top of the cemetery, because people didn't know there was anything else up there. You'd say, keep walking.
The water tank's only the start.
That's only the start of the cemetery.
But I've also asked that, the knowledge that Graham has accumulated over the years has been immense. And so that's all now being recorded through the Treasury in relationship to just the history relating to people on the,
Well, I mean, we hope that through his knowledge, we will find who to actually highlight on the walk.
So that's a work in progress still?
Work in progress, yes.
Yeah, I think it's a very important one, and, whether there's some assistance.
Yes. Yes, there's never a week goes past that he doesn't go up there and find graves of people and mark them out.
Yeah, he's there every day as a reader.
I dread to say to him, there was one on the bottom of this last page, I said there's a World War I grave under there, Graham, somewhere, and he was spent and he cleared the whole area. I mean, that grave hadn't been seen for 30, 40 years probably.
Yeah.
He found, in that extension clearing, he found the grave of a little 7-year-old boy. There's a whole line of people there.
So I think it's, the next couple of years to actually get the history tidied up in terms of Graham's knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
Althea, there are some pockets of funding that you can access and you do not need to be a legal entity.
All right.
So I'd love to have a conversation with you about that.
Thank you.
At some point.
Yes, please.
Right. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Greg is going to talk on behalf of the Treasury. I would like this item to have been part of, our workshop or something similar, not just in public forum. So I've left it to the last item so I can commit a little bit of extra time for the Treasury to be able to speak on behalf. So long as everyone doesn't mind, I'm going to allow a little bit of extra time.
And Jen,
Yeah, Jen. Jen, are you part of the submission with Greg?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you'll be speaking together, yeah.
It's Jen's,
She's on mute, you need to turn your mute off, Jan.
Got it.
yeah,
I'm on.
Okay, so I'm Greg Hampton. I'm the newly appointed chair of the Coromandel Heritage Trust. Thank you to the board and good morning to Chair, Community Board councillors and the staff. So thank you for the invite to come and give you an update on the Treasury today.
Pleasure.
I've got a bit of script here, which is probably which Jen has been very much a part of putting together. So I'll be a little bit stilted throughout, just covering these points off. But I think it's important to give you a thorough update on the Treasury and where we're at and where we're heading in the future. And very appropriate to have Althea precede us with those proposals around the cemeteries because they are a really important part of Thames heritage. I'm aware that the board members were emailed out our strategic plan, performance report and the board report to the AGM. I don't expect you to have gone through those documents, but they are very worthwhile documents to give you a good overview of where things are at. Firstly, I'd like to update the board on the recent AGM, which was well attended, and I want to also acknowledge and thank the board chair, Councillor Christie and Councillor Rodley for attending that AGM and providing that support. It's really appreciated. At the AGM, 3 new board members were appointed, those being myself, Kerry Doherty and Ross Sutton. At our first meeting, Adrian Catron nominated me for the chair and the board confirmed that appointment. So it wasn't an election as such, it was a consensus appointment. So I feel like the board has got some new fresh blood on it and also some experienced hands who have done some fantastic work in the first year, and I really acknowledge Dan here, who's an existing board member, and we'll talk about what the board has achieved in its first year. The board has 2-year terms before they have to stand down, so it's a very short term in which to try and achieve the objectives of the trust. I feel the board's in a strong position and very united with the way the first board meeting went, so I want to give the community board the confidence that it will be a united and a board that will be progressing very positively. Jan's written down a few points for those who may not be that familiar with the purposes of the trust, and I'll just go through those now. So the Treasury, the Trust and Treasury is the holder of paper-based records of the families and organisations of Thames, Coromandel and Hauraki communities. These would include maps, letters, photos, certificates, telegrams and more. The district is of course rich in both pre-colonisation and post-colonisation history. Thames was the largest growing centre in New Zealand at one point in time, and I think there's a statistic going around that I think it was 1 in 5 New Zealanders can trace their history back to Thames and the Coromandel, which is pretty extraordinary. The archive, of course, is a state-of-the-art facility that was fundraised for by local heritage enthusiasts. It won an award, architectural award, the year that it was built also. The build was heavily supported by local philanthropists and public funders to a value of 1.2 million and opened in 2012. It really is an amazing achievement for a small town. So kudos to all of the settlers of the trust and the people who got that project off the ground. It's very much volunteer run, although, as we know, Council and Community Board has funded a manager in the past 2 years. But it was volunteer run, exclusively volunteer run through 2017 until the operational management was supported by Thames Community Board, Thames-Coromandel District Council and Hauraki District Council. Council and TCB funds are used to support the employment of a full-time manager and a part-time assistant. As you would recognise, as a board and any board would recognise, that without having paid staff resource to assist you, it's really difficult to actually progress. So it's a hugely important resource for the Trust to continue to advance the archive for the community. It's a huge investment that's been made into the community, and that position is hugely important to enable the board, who are a bunch of busy people with day jobs. They commit a huge amount of time, but that resource is essential for the Treasury to continue its good work and to actually achieve, optimally achieve what's been put there before. And that's going to be a little bit of a pathway, and it will take a few more years to get that established. We are aware that we're coming to the final year of the funding agreement. And on the advice of the Mayor, the Trust intends to make a submission for further operational grant through the draft LTP submission process. So the Mayor suggested to the Trust Chair, previous Trust Chair, that the Board, the Trust submit to the draft LTP when it was out for submission. So we will be doing that.
It's good to hear.
The Trust is also aware of the need to develop a range of other income streams so that we're not there has already been a lot of work used in this board to develop those other income streams. And so I'll now go through, straight out of the Chair's report to the AGM, some of those achievements of the first calendar year of the current board. September 2019 to September 2020, $49,000 in external funding was achieved towards operating costs, upgrade of our IT assets and salaries. Asset upgrade included a refurbishment server, 4 refurbished desktop computers and 3 laptops. These grants came from major funders, Lottery, Community, Trust Waikato, COGS and Pub Charity, and a lot of that credit goes to Sue Wright for putting those funding assets. Our new strategic plan, which you have a copy of, was developed by the new board. I think it's a very good document, distributed by email to the membership recently, and has been adopted and being implemented through board subcommittees, giving the Trust a clear plan and direction for the future. The strategic plan will be a living document and will be reviewed annually to make sure that we are responding to environmental changes, such as funding, economic, and so forth. Indexing and cataloguing of our archive, it was identified that only around 10 to 15% of the items presently in the archive have been loaded onto Past Perfect Museum software, which is an industry-specific database. We have embarked on a project to have all archived items indexed and catalogued, meaning everyone will have access to our collections. So this will be implemented through a new website, which will be integrated with the database, and we will have a new audience worldwide access to the historical records and be able to sell both services and resources to that worldwide audience. So that's the plan for the next year. We will be engaging an IT specialist to put together that plan for us to ensure that we run that project in such a way that we do not waste that investment. IT projects are fraught with poor implementation, and it's essential that we spend these public funds very diligently. So due diligence will be done around that project plan before any contracts are entered into. 2 new True Tales books will be out shortly. More True Tales of Thames and True Tales of the East of the Waikato, which is the new one. The board at its first meeting on Monday night approved the funding of the printing of 150. I can endorse these books as being hugely popular books. As the owner of Carson's Bookshop, True Tales of Thames is one of our top-selling non-fiction books, and has sold more than in our shop than Lee Childs, who is the biggest fiction author in the world, who sells a book every 8 seconds around the world. But True Tales of Thames, produced by the Treasury, has sold more copies than any single Lee Childs book in our shop. We are in the process of appointing a new manager, and we have a preferred candidate that we are currently negotiating with. Without revealing who that candidate is, they have a Master's in Martial Arts in History and Museums. They've done work with Te Papa. They are a heritage advisor to a major New Zealand city. I won't reveal the city because that might reveal the person, and they may not sign the contract yet. But they are young, vibrant, IT savvy. They have developed virtual heritage walks. And as soon as Althea was talking about the tours of the cemeteries, that type of thing could also be a virtual tour. In the 1990s Heritage Study, which the Thames Community Board underwent, big investment by heritage expert Di Stewart, heritage walks were proposed in that heritage study and strategy. So with a resource such as what we're trying to secure at the moment, we will make an absolutely game-changing leap forward with the Treasury. I'm now going to hand over to Sue to talk about the marketing plans, social media, and funding, which she's been responsible for.
Right, number of letters, just the wrong name, that's all.
It's all
She doesn't look anything like Susan.
Greg, thank you. You've done a fantastic job there of describing what's happening at the Treasury at the moment after such a short tenure with us, and thank you very much for that. Thanks very much everyone for this opportunity to speak. Greg really has covered off in just highlights everything that's going on. But if there's any aspect of the marketing or the funding that you'd like to speak about or ask me about, please do so. And just before we move into that, if we can just let Althea know that that lottery, environment and heritage is probably the place to go to for the sort of funding that is required. And in fact, the Treasury is going to be making an application to LEH in January next year. So I think we should be talking, Althea, because that's a wonderful project that you're talking about. So any questions, people, or is there more information you need?
Jan, I just wanted to ask one question. There was mention of the Mayor putting in the long-term plan some district funding, is it right? District and Araki district based core, or what nature is that taking? I'm just wanting to confirm that.
Okay, well, obviously, Strat, we're not in a position to confirm anything. It's very, very clear that Council the two councils are in a very tight position. So we understand that the level of contribution that has come to the Treasury has been extraordinary, and that we realise we're not going to be able to be supported at that same level. Mayor Sandra has suggested we nonetheless come to TCDC for funding, which we will do. She has not spoken about any particular level of funding. HDC, they have indicated that they're possibly even in a worse position, and that I think the level of support we'd be looking at from them will be the sort of thing that the community boards are able to grant. So we're very realistic about the fact that we've got a lot of work still to be done around funding. And even though we've had significant success with public funders, it still is going to be a real challenge for us to raise sufficient funds to pay the people, the good people that we need to pay in order to make the Treasury absolutely hum in the way that it should do, the way that it can do. So we are going to be coming cap in hand to you guys again, if we may, but we understand that the Treasury absolutely must perform, and we also acknowledge that that the Treasury has not performed quite as well as it may have over the last couple of years. So up from here, I say. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the funding to either of you? Do you think it's relevant in terms of the services you provide, you know, if we put aside the economic challenges, that you represent Hauraki, Thames-Coromandel and Thames Community Board, that they're all valid streams to be explored by what services you provide?
Absolutely. Greg, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to?
Well, you go first if you like, Jan.
Okay. I think if the Treasury is doing a good job, it is absolutely appropriate that those three local bodies contribute to the Treasury. I think we have done less than a good job, frankly, in reaching far enough beyond the west coast of the west seaboard of the peninsula. We have got work to do in reaching into Hauraki and over into this eastern seaboard that I'm looking at the moment. I'm heartened that just very, very recently there has been a collaboration struck between Mercury Bay Museum and the Treasury. So oral history is beginning over here, and Althea may know more about that than what I do actually, but I know that we're beginning to reach out into these other areas, and that's really what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Just the baseline that the chair is coming from is that you started out with, I think it was $80,000 and then reduced to $60,000 and now it's $45,000. My thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, is that some base core level of funding, sustainable treasury, which operates at Hauraki and district level, or New Zealand level really, to some extent, requires a lower, even the lower level core funding. So if it could be maintained at 45,000, that gives you guys the ability to do the strikingly good work that you've done over the last year in getting external funding. That's the point I'm sort of making, it just getting that balance right. And so we haven't seen any submissions, we have not seen any submissions to Thames Community Board in that regard, or any discussion. So it was interesting to hear Greg talk about the Mayor is making some provision for that, and I think it's really important that that provision is.
I don't think
if I may clarify, Chair, if I may clarify that, so Sandra's advice was by way of email with the the chair, the previous chair of the trust. So it wasn't a commitment. It was advice on if we wished to seek funding, how we should go about it. So if I can just clarify that. Can I also, just following on from Jan's, I think that she does herself and the existing board a disservice in saying that the Treasury hasn't done a good job. You've got high standards, Sue, and the Treasury has only been in place since 2012. So it's quite a new organisation. It has a world-class facility, I think, and it has a good volunteer base around that. But the significance is the world-class archive, which has the ability to service the sub-region. And
it's quite eye-making too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will never be built again in our district. It's not a facility you would replicate elsewhere in the district. So I think it does stand up as a district facility, not just a Thames Community Law facility, and beyond the district as well, so Hauraki district as well. It takes time to collect. Donations are coming in from the public all of the time. Those donations have to be vetted, have to be cleaned before they're archived. It's a slow and thorough process, and those resources for the wider sub-region will grow, and the services will grow naturally along with it. So, you know, we're quite young as an organisation, but the potential for this organisation is huge and is critical to preserving the history. Another thing that the Treasury has really not touched on, but there is a clear mandate in the deed, is to also represent tangata whenua. There were two iwi tangata whenuas as settlers to the original deed, and at our AGM on previous Sunday, the board moved and the membership approved that the single vacant seat on the trust is reserved for tangata whenua representation, which the board will not simply make that available to the appropriate iwi authorities if they wish to fill that seat. So there are amongst us, there are board members who are very keen to make sure that the Treasury also represents tangata whenua iwi history, not solely post-colonial history as well. So
that's great. So they'll come back with a recommendation then.
Yeah. If I can just,
I've just got a few questions on the floor here. I'll start with Peter. And then I'll
do you have any records of the demographic of the people who actually use the services of the Treasury?
Yeah, I couldn't speak to that one, Peter, but if we're not currently collecting it, I'm sure it's something. Jan, can you speak to that?
Yes, well, I can indirectly. I think I can't actually give you that answer. Peter, is it? I can't give you that answer, I'm sorry, Peter, but it's a very, very good point, as Greg says. What I can say, though, is that our website is used very broadly internationally by people who are interested in this district in whatever way. So a big fat chunk of the people using our website come from places all over the world. So we're not just serving the districts, we're serving the world, and the district and New Zealand. We are serving the world.
It's perhaps a little bit difficult to get funding from the world, but you know, if, as you're saying, 20% of the people in New Zealand are in some way connected, if that was reflected in the services provided, perhaps there becomes a bigger picture rather than just a district, you know, funding.
Like when I explore my Celtic background in Scotland online, I'm quite happy to put my credit card in to get information. I do not expect to get a service internationally for nothing. And I think that's the key for me, is how do you make it virtual in a way that millions of people have access to it.
Sorry, you've got a question?
Actually, my question is around visitor numbers. So I'm not really particularly talking about the website, but how many people are actually walking through the door per annum, and what's the cost?
There are around about 10 people who walk through the door as researchers a week. So the physical visitors to the Treasury are limited. That is partly because of the fact that we can only be open at the moment 3 days a week, which is something we are intending to address as soon as we're able to. And our objective is to be open through the broader part of January, when so many people are visiting the Coromandel. So yes, so not a huge number of visitors currently, physically, and the Treasury is known as the Thames' very best kept secret. Now, marketing and communications is the thing that is going to change that situation, and we have made quite a significant beginning on raising the profile of the Treasury within Thames and the peninsula. Obviously, the website, past perfect, that museum database that Greg was talking about, those are the things that are going to allow the Treasury to be reached by people anywhere in the world. Paying to, put your credit card in to pay someone to do the research for you for great grandma is absolutely where we are heading. Of course, it all costs a truckload of money, unfortunately, and so we're having to do things step by step by step. And it's tempting to try to sprint when really we're only crawlers still. But
if I can just follow on,
Conscious of time, and I know Martin would like to ask a question, but I'll finish up. Jen.
Yes, so at the AGM, I thought it was interesting because you said about how it's a young organisation, and Mrs. Dunwoody was at the AGM, and a comment that she made has stuck with me, where it was basically along the lines of when they started off this idea, the thought that they would be where they are now was, just not a fantasy, but she expressed this amazement that they'd got to where they were. So I think your point about it being a young organisation finding its feet, having that initial funding from councils to support it, is very valid. And I was pleased to see that they're looking at new revenue streams, and so that was my take on that. So not really a question.
So Chair, if I could just follow on from Jen on that, because I think it was a great question around the walk-in. And it has been a challenge. There's been lots of disruption, of course, with COVID, and also the resignation of our manager. So the doors have not been open long enough, or for enough during per week, and that is an objective of the board to actually, with the new resource coming on, we will have much longer hours. We will do much more promotion. The online services, I think you do have to take into account online visitations as well as part of those statistics, and we will capture all of those statistics.
Yeah.
I know you're very short for time, so I wonder if I just finish off with a quick statement about financial, because I know that was a big part of inviting us here today. So financially, the Trust has secure funding to maintain the operations through to sort of mid to late 2021. For that purpose, we've made this manager appointment a 9-month fixed term contract, so that's very significant. So we have funding for a 9-month fixed term contract for that resource. We will be doing our best to extend our funding to increase the term of that contract, because that position is critical to the continued development of the Treasury. And once again, I just want to thank the board and community for its support of the Treasury.
Well, I know there's only one window, and that starts on the 1st of July 2021. And from a council perspective, and the long-term plan is already in vote. So that's the questions why I was asking, is there something in the long-term plan or isn't there? I leave it with Dunn to actually contemplate on that. And because I see no evidence of it, so I'm saying it. So anyway, any other questions? No.
Thank you.
I can see that, you're really heading in a wonderful positive direction, and fantastic.
And thank you for your time today. It's really appreciated that you spent so much time with us. And I'm just going to finish with a very quick personal note, which is, as a local community member and business owner, to thank the board for its Create the Vibe Thames project. I think it's been really well put together by Erin. Thank you, Erin. It's been highly visible, high level of engagement, and we're excited to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, Greg. Really good. Agenda. Thanks, everyone. Yes, Rob.
I'm happy to move to exit on the con.
Thanks, Rick. Please.
We've done that, and all members are present.
Oh, well, I'm engaging all our public forum. We've just done that. Item's not on the agenda.
No further items to add.
See, that's simple, isn't it? Conflicts of interest from any board members relating to agenda items. There being none, and then move and take minutes, confirmation. Items being read, and any issues with those minutes? Members would like to raise?
Just in the way they come out, Martin Rodley's report has ended up in the middle of my report.
Okay, thanks for that.
It's kind of obvious, but it's just.
It's grown up.
I think that is very cheeky.
Doesn't it?
Very
No
cheeky.
response to that.
Yeah, well, it's,
That's been noted. Any other issues relating to that? No, there being none. Mover and seconder for those minutes. Thanks.
yeah.
Gee, that's good. We go to 2.1, funding for the Civic Centre foyer revitalisation. That's on page 16 of your agenda, and I'll allow Erin to speak to that. Thanks, Erin.
Through the chair, I just wanted to provide a slight amendment around timing. Hannah Rose and I sat down last week and looked at all of what we need to get achieved for the 6th of March, and so that transitions in itself. So what we will aim to do is do the civic centre where, if you were in agreement with this proposal, by the end of the next financial year, and do it as a standalone which might have to be advertised or something, because I don't think that we can have it all complete by the 6th of March, but we'll obviously have that other project finished, it's ready for the 6th of March. So timing is that it will likely occur after the 6th of March.
Yep.
I think that's it.
Right. Yes, correct.
Yeah, because it's, I've been hearing on the radio that might be.
So through the chair, my understanding is from the organisers that we're waiting for advice as to Destination Coromandel's decision around future of the eyesight around the current funding was in play, if there's anything to date about what their response is.
Rely in terms of what they're considering going forward and what changes. Right. Yeah, what's that space, Sheree? You're right. I mean, at the moment, there's been well, there's been no communication back to Thames-Coromandel Board, I'm aware of. So, nothing much I can do about it if they don't communicate it back.
Should we just ask the eyesight?
Would you like a request from the community board, or does any of the councillors know what's happening in that space, or is it?
On our agenda to talk about our workshop tomorrow.
So can we just bring Sally back to Steve and what conversation? Can we just bring Sally up to speed what the conversation just took place?
Yeah, I was just going to do that, yeah. Sheree, just ask a question about what's happening in the destination Coromandel funding space, because she understands that some changes might be afoot, and the Thames Community Board hasn't been advised about what those changes might be at this point, as it affects Thames. I know it's a district, district funded, funded tourism, whatever.
I think it was in the public forum, wasn't it?
Well, so my understanding is that, to me, it's two totally different sources of funding. Like this destination Coromandel, and that's as part of the long-term plan being discussed, is that the relevant way for tourism. And then they've got a subcontract to run 2 eyesights, and there is a sense of how was there enough, etc., for that to run. And so I think we'd be fair to say there's negotiations going on about the viability of that subcontract, and we'll hear about that tomorrow. So to me, two totally, not totally different, but different arguments.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, except that's not my question. My question is around, so the Erin's talking about the revitalisation of the Civic Centre foyer, and that's, I was just sort of going along the track of, so we're going to go and do some revitalisation of the Civic Centre foyer, but there's going to be maybe possibly a space there, so what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So through the chair.
So it wasn't about.
Yeah, so through the chair, I have brought in email or anything that you know, if it was something it would obviously issue of service opportunity. Given in a situation around it being a gratified opportunity, so she that would take, you know.
Well, most of these things, dare I say, in fact, not a district outside, and we'll probably come back to the community board in terms of where it needs to be locally funded to maintain an eyesight. So there's all those questions related to the fact that we've got a long-term plan, and some of these decisions are being made strategically, and the timing of these things in terms of just providing funding. We did want a local eyesight type thing. So, you know, I just see it as a mess in the forward thinking, so that's all. Yes, Mark.
And yeah, just acknowledging what you said about how there's, how there's already discussion out in the community. I was at a Heritage Network meeting last week, and it was pointedly asked to me, you know, why is council closing the Thames eyesight? So yes, there is stuff going on out there. And in the absence of information, because it's only being discussed as in the long-term plan, then you know, other things come in to fill that.
So I don't know what they haven't got.
So the reason why I bring it is because I wonder, after that happens, is the boy in the place, or, you know, with this revitalisation, is it just the foyer and now we're going to have a space? Does it become bigger? Because the eyesight area, what's in there once it's empty, is another big space.
Well, if Destination Coromandel chose to close the eyesight, or there's no reason why that couldn't be taken over by a private company to have a similar sort of service running there, like they do in Whaumataa, for example. So Whaumataa has a space where there is an eyesight operating, but it's operated by a private individual or private company. So there's no.
It's supported by the Thames-Coromandel.
I believe there'd be some support, yeah. But one of the things they consider.
I think what we're trying to do is line of dominoes up in the perfect order, and there are things that are interrupting our order, and I can sense frustration about that,
Yes, I mean, the original question is about the eyesight being in the civic hub area in our incentive streets program, and I understand that there's some wider questions relating to whether in fact that space remains as a eyesight, and I'm just posing those questions because I can see some holes in the whole thing.
So my question is, if we do this funding for the entrance as it is now, regardless of the potential other space, is that a good idea? That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
And what I'm saying, I think, is that needs to happen anyway, because who knows potentially what could happen with the rest of the hall, but it's a good question.
Yeah, and just with the actual physical thing of it, I would consider it extremely unlikely that that space that's currently taken up by the eyesight could ever become a foyer, because you've got the toilets on the one side of it, and you've got the wall of the auditorium and a cleaners cupboard on the other. So, yeah, it would make no sense for that to become a new foyer, but yeah.
All right.
You can't even access the
Suggested resolution, is there any question on that resolution?
I've got a couple of questions. So my understanding of what's been proposed is as a result of the public consultation in the creative vibe place, that the suggestions have been that we need to beautify the civic centre entrance, and what's been presented to us is, well, we can find some budget, 12.5 grand to do that. So the first question is, when we look at where that budget's coming from, which is community services, contract community services, what actually is that budget intended for? What's the intention of that budget?
So through the chair, the contract for community services budget is where we have groups. So the Treasury is an example, which does a 3-year contract by the LGP to deliver something.
Yeah.
And so one particular group, and basically we don't need it anymore.
Right.
And so last financial year we used it as part of the payment towards Lochmas within concept plan for the town centre.
Right.
So we identified that there was this this money available.
Right.
And so we've just brought it forward to the board to see if it's something we're interested in.
And so given that, I'm just wondering whether we've, from a procedural point of view, whether we've got a good wrong way round, whether in fact we should be being advised that, hey, by the way, there's some extra budget available. In this case, 12.5 grand. Here are your options. You know, being advised from council, here are the options of what they could be spent for. You know, they could be used for mowing the airfield, beautifying the whatever. You know, whatever the things are, rather than us being just presented with a single thing, and you have to know that there's a budget over there that could be used. So I'm just wondering whether it's not a good way for us to go about making a decision on something like that. I mean, yeah. So that's kind of where I have some disquiet, just whether it's the right way of handling those things.
Is that community services, contract community services budget, is that the same budget that has contracts with some community halls to provide the service? Is that the same budget, or is it slightly different?
It can be.
Because if it is, that's probably one that Cloud on the Hall has.
There's some variations around it. And again, the way it's utilised, there's not much budget anywhere at the moment, if I'm going to be honest. So so that's, I mean, if you wanted some options, I would probably need at least steer around what sort of things you know, wanting to fund.
Does Treasury have any sort of service contract with council?
They do, so they've got contract for community services from the community board, and there's also money from the
So that's possibly money that's
district
going
council as
towards
well.
Treasury. I'm just asking.
Well, yeah.
You know.
I suppose your point, I think, is entirely valid. It just, what my sense is that creating the vibe, other than the external money, we've just sort of nipped and plucked to get our sort of share of it. And it mightn't win any prizes for procedural excellence, but it's sort of, we've got this external funding, how do we maximise it? So I think that it's a very fair point, and I think in this situation we're trying to both maximise the usefulness of this time-framed money, and the other thing that I'm sensing is that I haven't seen, we've got huge community engagement at the moment around creating the vibes, and lots of other things like airfields and cemeteries, and to me, going with where the community's going seems incredibly important right now to maximise that. And if the board agreed with this, to me, this is another way of combining a little bit of money and maximising volunteer and community engagement with us. And for a long time, we haven't had that sense of working together. It's sort of like, well, you're the community board and you owe us and you're not doing enough and it will be new. Whereas right now I see something different. So
I agree with that, and I think, you know, Greg picked it up really well. You know, the creating the vibe is people are noticing. They're noticing murals and they're noticing, you know, and it is having a big impact. And, you know, the guys did with the hurricane, you know, those things are all very visible. If I take that, how many people go into the foyer of the civic centre? You know, and is this, if we're looking for the things that are going to hit people,
It's on the outside.
you know, would we be better to, you know, stick up a totem pole down, you know, something where people see, because at the end of the day, beautifying the civic centre entrance thing is.
So through the chair.
Or I'm misunderstanding what you mean.
So through the chair, just to give you a little background, the Thames Business Association initially raised it before we kind of got out into the container around they're doing some night markets. We've got more events coming into Thames next year, and the general feel is that the civic centre is being in that heart of our town, and we want to create heart of the town is not very inspiring. And that in terms of what we wanted to do is really, by doing some treatments, is allow it to be an opportunity for us to trial, for example, partnering with schools to put their artwork in there that actually will draw people into the foyer. You know, like at the moment it's just a cabin, creepy space with terrible lighting. I think that's a gold. But you know, if we have you know, high school artwork or things like that, community artwork in that, invariably people are going to go in there because they want to see, you know, what their kids and grandchildren have done. So it was really about, I think that the context that I received from people is around having a civic centre to be proud of when people do come in, and when we do have concerts and shows and things as well. So that's just the context around how it sort of originally came up.
because a couple of times, and the other thing that I think is a wasted resource there, and I do acknowledge it takes time to clean toilets, but I'm embarrassed when 2 busloads of people arrive from Tauranga and we've got 3 toilets and there's this big long queue.
Yeah.
And I know that there's, you know, 10 or, you know, pans just didn't, and several times the hall's been open and I've just opened the door and said, you know, use them. And so to me, as part of being a friendly town, you can lock the internal rooms, so that if you had that space open more, well, then we've automatically sorted a lot more toilets. And I acknowledge toilets need cleaning, I do acknowledge there's a cost, but for us to be able to provide a better service for intercity, etc., to me feels important as well, and this opens that possibility up.
So I think it's important to acknowledge what Peter has said. Peter is saying in the sense of that if there is an available budget somewhere that's not being used because the community control is no longer operating, and we've been submitting to the trust that actually operated that in the past, that there should have been a little bit more opportunity about the options going forward in terms of other things that we might have a priority with. I think this is just one of those sort of cases where there's been so much energy, strong energy, board energy going into a project like our Centre Streets program, which is so high up in the level, and we all agree it's high up in the level of what we're trying to do as a priority at the moment, that Erin and her team and Jenna Rose, she's been able to see an opportunity of some funding, because she has no other funding. She can't use the Centre Streets program funding or the NZTA funding for this to enlighten the civic centre entrance, which will marry in well with what's been having regard to in terms of what's happening in the streetscape. So it's just sort of one of those one-off type situations where, look, please, let's provide some funding to be able to actually just marry that in together a little bit more. We either accept it or we don't. So that's the resolution, and I'm in favour of it, but I can hear people. I think that's really important. That's what the process is.
Peter, you asked a question or said something before about how much is the centre actually used. In audit and risk, we get a whole different bunch of performance measures, and the performance measure for the Thames Memorial Civic Centre is the number of hours that it's available for use and the proportion of times that is actually used. And according to the one we had back in beginning of October, it's used 40% of the time as at the moment. So that's the other thing I think about that, is that it's a very measurable thing that we can look at in a year's time. We can say, was this a good investment? Yes or no, because the usage is either gone up or has stayed the same. So
that 40% taken into account being close to COVID?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. It's really hard, isn't it, when you actually get you get a grant from NZTA of this nature for a street artscape, temporary street artscape type thing, and we're actually trying to lift the game for Thames, and then knowing that in fact we have absolutely no other resources that don't fit that criteria to actually enhance around it. And this is a typical example of it, and so it's tough, and also, but I fully support it, and I'm just, if we're moving anywhere in relationship to this now, I'd like to move the recommendation. I've got somebody on the floor that can move the recommendation. Are there any other questions? Martin?
I'll move.
Yeah, you'll move. The seconder? Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. All good? Thank you. Right, 3.1. How are we going for time? Do you want to adjourn for a morning cup of tea? And bearing in mind at 12 o'clock we've got Linda, right?
Yes.
From the library. And just having a little bit of tea while lunch will.
Right, so it's at 12? Cool.